Disclaimer. The following episode contains spoilers for The Coldest City and Atomic Blonde. Don't go crying to your mum if we spoil it for you. You've been warned. Welcome to Podcapers, the official podcast of a place to hang your cape. And this week, I thought Edinburgh was the coldest city, but apparently not. Actually, you know what? Yeah, it is the coldest city. I maintain because it's chuffing freezing over here. Cue the music! Hello there, capers, and as I said, welcome to Podcapers, the official podcast of a place to hang your cape. My name is Scott James Merridew, and this is a show where we talk about various geek and nerd-related topics, and I'm joined each week by a very special different guest. Now, this week, we're joined by someone who's done bloody everything. He's written books, he's written graphic novels, and video games. He's awesome! Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Antony Johnston!
Hello, everyone.
How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good to hear, good to hear. Now, you've done a lot of stuff, but one thing I've noticed that keeps cropping up in a lot of your work is you do quite a lot of spy stuff, don't you?
I do, and I'm doing even more of it now for kind of obvious reasons because people are asking me to. But yeah, it's something that I've always been fascinated with. I grew up, sort of reading spy novels and watching spy movies. And not just, obviously the usual sort of James Bond stuff, especially here in the UK that we grew up with, but also, reading John le Carré and Len Deighton and authors like that, and watching TV shows like The Sandbaggers. And yeah, I love the genre. But the funny thing was that until I wrote The Coldest City, I had never actually written, that was my first spy fiction. For some reason, it had just never occurred to me to try writing my own. And so when I did, The Coldest City is what came out the other side. And since then, obviously, I've written a lot more spy stuff because, I enjoyed doing that and it was well received. So
quite rightly, it was well received. It's a really interesting. I had no idea that it was your first one. I knew you've written several stuff in the genre, but I didn't know it was your first one. And it's bloody brilliant, even more so for that.
Thank you.
No, there's no worries. And with me for spy fiction, it's something that I've dipped at most. I've dipped not my toe so much as my knee. I'm knee level into the spy fiction because I like James Bond. I like another thing that you've worked on actually, which is Alex Rider. That was something.
Oh yes. Yeah,
I read a lot of the books by Anthony Horowitz. They were brilliant because the reason why I liked those books was because it was spy for kids stuff, but at the same time it wasn't juvenile. It was actually quite mature. It had like the gadgets and stuff and evil henchmen and all that sort of stuff, but it was something that was just both accessible for younger readers but also something that actually just broadened their horizons, and it wasn't just silly fun. It was fun, but it was serious fun, which is the best kind of fun.
Yeah, well, and they get darker as they go along as well, as Alex grows up and with each successive book. But yes, that's exactly right. I think that's the appeal of those books because I love them as well. That's why I do the graphic novel adaptations of them, because I do love the books. And I think a lot of that appeal is because, yes, they are obviously aimed at, younger readers, but at no point do they patronize those readers. Anthony doesn't ever talk down to his younger readers, which I think, some people do fall into that trap, but he never does, even when, and there are parts of those books that are a bit silly.
But that's part of the fun.
Right, exactly. And they're treated, as you say, in a fun way rather than in a sort of juvenile way. So, yeah, they're I suppose you could say actually technically that those were my first spy fiction, because I actually did the first of those, the first adaptation, Stormbreaker, I wrote in 2005, I think, or 2006.
See, I read it when it came out because there were two copies. There was Stormbreaker 1 and the sequel one to that, Point Blank.
Point Blank, yeah.
Yeah, and I read both of those. I haven't read any more of them, although I have read several of the books. And let me tell you this way: I enjoyed those adaptations much more than I did the film. Let me put it that way.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes. Which is a great shame because Anthony wrote the film. He wrote the screenplay, and I read that screenplay. That's what the graphic novel is adapted from the screenplay rather than the final movie, because we wanted them to come out at the same time. And the screenplay I thought was great. I read it and I was like, this is going to be an amazing film. And then it shows you the power of the director,
Hollywood system,
and the editor. Well, but even outside of the system, just the power of the director, the power of the editor, the power of the musical, the composer and the musical director as well, to create the sort of movie that they are envisioning, and to create an atmosphere and a mood and what have you, regardless of the script or the performances by the actors, because obviously the film that came out was technically the same as the screenplay Antony wrote, but it was very, very different in mood and feel. And I thought not as good for it. I'm really looking forward to, they just announced a TV series.
Really? Ooh, this is news to me. Ooh, I'm excited now.
With Antony writing and producing, and it will be produced by I can't remember the name of the production company, but it's the same production company that has done stuff like Foyle's War with Antony. So, the quality should be much higher for that. I don't think there are any more solid details other than it's been announced and it's going to get made. Beyond that, I don't think there is anything public being said, but I'm really looking forward to that, because I think with Antony having a stronger creative hold over it, we will get a much better adaptation.
Absolutely, because I mean, he's great. I've been a fan of his for years. The reason why I single out right, because the reason I don't really like the film adaptation so much. I mean, there are, as you say, elements of it that work and that are very representative of Antony and the books, but just little things really normal. Like, do you know what? I can't actually remember the character's name now. The character that Stephen Fry played. What was his
Smithers.
name? Smithers, that's it. You know what? I loved his character in the books because he was the only person in MI6 or whatever it was that was really actually actively nice to Alex and really liked him.
Yeah.
And he actually looked out for him. And I love Stephen Fry. I think he's great. But in the movie, he was just like, "No, you're here, are you? Okay, well, I'm going to give you a bunch of gadgets and then you'll never see me again. Bye-sies." I'm like, what is that? Is this what we get?
Yeah, it was, as I say, it was not, I think, what most people involved were expecting to come out the other end. But happily, as I say, the graphic novels, because obviously the film never got a sequel, but we continued doing those, and we're up to book 5, Scorpia, came out last year or the year before, and book 6, Archangel, will be out, I think, next year or the year after. I know that Emma Vicelli, the artist, is deep in drawing that at the moment. So yeah, technically the Alex Rider stuff will probably my first spy fiction books, but obviously that's an adaptation. It's not actually my original story. There's still a lot of me in those graphic novels, but obviously I defer to Antony in terms of the plot and the story and what have you, and he has final approval over everything. So it wasn't until I did The Coldest City that I feel like that's my first one, because obviously that was completely original and, totally under my control.
So how did that come about? Was it just like you sat down one day and said, you know what, I'm going to write a spy graphic novel?
Pretty much, actually.
The best stories often start with that sort of thing. You know what I'm going to do?
Yeah. I was in a period where I'd been doing a lot of commissioned work, a lot of work for hire, and basically just, doing a lot of work for other people. And I did an arc of Queen and Country, the spin-off series of Queen and Country, which is called Queen and Country Declassified, which was all about the Declassified was all about the backstories of the agents in SIS before they joined the service in Greg Rucker's series Queen and Country. So Greg asked me to write one of those for the agent Nicky Poole and his past as a SAS soldier in Northern Ireland.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right. So, and I have a bit of, part of my family is Scots-Irish, so I have some sort of knowledge of that situation. I'm not an expert by any means, but that's partly why Greg asked me to do it. And also, I think, because Greg and I have known one another for a long time, we both like each other's work. So I wrote that. That was drawn by Chris Mitten, incidentally, who then obviously I went on to work with and do Wasteland with. And I had such a good time writing it. I literally just enjoyed writing it so much that I thought, okay, I need to do something like this. Clearly, this is, much as I've always read this genre, this is a genre that I clearly enjoy writing as well. So I've got to do something of my own. The next graphic novel I sit down and do, I'm going to do something in this vein, some kind of spy book. And so, a couple of years later, the next opportunity I got, was when I wrote The Coldest City. I took a summer off. I literally wrote it over the course of 2 months where I did nothing else. I cleared all my deadlines, all my other work, and just started writing. And after 2 months, out came this graphic novel script. And when I started writing it, I didn't even have a publisher in mind. I didn't have a contract. I was literally just writing it for me. I was writing exactly the book that I would want to read.
As
and it
spec
was,
as you can get.
Exactly, yeah. And then it was halfway through when I thought, oh, actually, there's something here. This is going pretty well. And that's when I got in touch with Oni Press and said, hey, because I have obviously a long-standing relationship with them, and said, hey, I'm doing this book. I'd like to put it out in this sort of format. What do you think? And, obviously things kind of rolled from there. But yeah, the whole thing was just done, as I say, purely for me, with no thought as originally as to who would publish it or whether anybody else would even want to read it. It was just something that I felt I had to get out of my system and do for myself.
I think if it's something that you're passionate about, then other people will want to read it because more often than not, they will share the passion, unless it's something really, really obscure and weird. But, because the thing with me with the spy fiction genre is that it can be, on the surface, when you just look at it from a distance, it can seem so simple and plain. Oh, there's spies and bad guys and secret dossiers and microfilms, and that's pretty much it. But once you really start looking at it properly, it becomes a tangled, webbed spiral of intrigue and interestingness that I find so absorbing.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, there's that, and for me, the whole reason that The Coldest City was set when it is in Berlin at the end of the Cold War was because there's also the Cold War itself was a fascinating period of history where literally nobody trusted anybody else. We appear to have circled around to that state of affairs in the world again 30 years
happy
later.
Days are here again.
Indeed. Or is it 40 years later? No, 30 years, isn't it? But yeah, during the heyday of the Cold War, there was distrust on every side. And one of the things, yes, that I love about the spy genre is that you simply do not know who you can trust, who you can believe. You can't even necessarily believe the narrator. Everything is potentially a deceit. And so as a reader, I find that enormously satisfying because you're constantly trying to figure out who's telling the truth, if anybody is, what's really going on, as opposed to what people are telling you is going on. And yeah, trying to figure out the mystery for yourself. I love doing that as a reader. So I really enjoy setting that challenge as a writer.
I mean, for me, it feels comparative to like the mystery genre, but on a much either smaller or often smaller, larger or smaller scale, just in terms of how much is at stake. Because as I say, it's in the closing days of the Cold War, and it all feels like, both within the wider events in the world and in the plot of the book, that everything, the whole system, is just going to go thumph.
Oh, collapse completely. Yeah, absolutely. And it is a mystery story. And the spy genre, in large part, not always, not exclusively, but in large part, is generally a mystery genre. It is very closely related to the crime genre. Thrillers and crime and spy thrillers, they all kind of get sucked into the same area of the bookstore, if you like, for a reason, because they are all essentially mysteries. There is some kind of, it may not be an outright crime in the traditional sense of the word in a spy novel, but it is still basically illegal stuff going on. And so, yeah, they all kind of sit in the same area in my mind. And almost all of my stories, actually, even if they're not thrillers or crime-based, are mysteries. I actually only realized this fairly recently when I was talking to somebody else, and I realized that almost every story I write is some kind of a mystery. There's some puzzle at the heart of it that the characters are trying to figure out. And I think that's just because I love those kinds of stories. They're what appeal to me as a reader. And so when I started writing spy stories, it felt like a natural thing to me that they should also be mysteries. And The Coldest Winter, the prequel to Coldest City, is the same. That's a huge mystery at the core of the book. It's a big puzzle to try and figure out. I know I've had feedback from sort of several people who read it and said that they almost threw the book across the room at the end because they'd been so thoroughly fooled. And I regard that as an absolute vindication. That's the best review that a mystery writer can have, really, that somebody is so angry that I fooled them so comprehensively.
Outsmarted once again, damn you!
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the same for me. For me, it is a genuine source of because I love mystery stories. I love Agatha Christie. I love Arthur Conan Doyle and all that sort of stuff. And that is one of the reasons why I like Harry Potter. But when I don't know what's going on, I feel this sense of like, okay, can we find out what's going on now, please? And I would not be a very good spy. I would break instantly. Talking in code words with some foreigner. Oh, you'll see, Mr. Merdew, if you want the secret, just give me the codes. Just give me the codes. Just give me them now. Give me them now. I'm through waiting around. I commend Lorraine and all these other characters on their patience.
Right. Yes. You do need to be very patient, I think, to be a spy. Yes.
Yeah. God. And I just the ambiguity surrounding it all can be because you have to know that all these characters know something. So it's not just figuring out what they know; it's who knows what and how much what, who knows where. It's if you can follow that at all. It's
right.
I like that. It lends itself to such intricacy, which lends the characters to have such depth. Because then that's when we get into motivation, and I think that's what I like about Percival, and how he's gone native, and how he
he's one of my favorite characters to write in the book because he's on the surface, a very shallow man. That's the thing. On the first reading, you might not realize the depths of the character.
Pip, what, that sort of thing.
Well, and also, being the old school misogynist and all that sort of thing. But yeah, if you reread, and especially if you read Coldest Winter, which is all about Percival's early days in Berlin, then you will get to this deeper aspects of that character and realize why he is the way he is, why he acts the way he does. And just makes him a much more complex character because there's so much going on beneath the surface, as there is with Lorraine as well. But obviously, so far, she's only been in one book. I'm actually working on the third book at the moment, and that will be all about Lorraine again. So we'll get to see a lot more of the sort of depth and complexity of her as well. But again, that is in the first book. And it is in the movie as well. I've seen some criticism of the movie of people saying like, oh, well, her character's got no depth. I think that's a very poor reading of the movie. She had
depth. She just had depth and action scenes as well.
Right. Well, and she hid that depth behind a very cold, icy exterior, which is the point of the character. That's one of the reasons why I was so happy when I saw how Charlize was playing the character. I visited the set while they were filming in Budapest, and the moment I saw her on, filming, doing a take, that was it. I was like, yep, she's got it. And I was filled with confidence.
Wasn't this a passion project of hers? Wasn't she like really, really into doing it?
Oh yeah, it was her production company that optioned the book.
Well, there you go then.
Yeah, it was her. She bought it. She always wanted to star in this movie. That was always the case. Because it was her production company that optioned it because she was looking for something like The Coldest City, something that could be a vehicle for her to reestablish herself as in action roles, as an action star. And, obviously she achieved that. But yes, so it took 5 years of corralling and negotiating and, herding cats and what have you to get the project finally into development. It was optioned about 3 months before the book was released in 2012, early 2012. And then it was almost exactly 5 years later when things finally started moving and we got directors involved and we had all the financing and they took it out to Cannes and pre-sold all the foreign rights and all that sort of Hollywood business stuff. But that meant that we had a budget, we had a production, and all of a sudden it's going to happen. And from that point on, the train starts rolling downhill and, crushing everything in its path because the machine has taken over at that point. But it took 5 years to get there.
Wow. It's amazing because when we see the movies, we always think that we think that development starts when the film's announced, but it's
no, not at all. No.
I really like the movie. I wanted to see the movie from the first time I saw the trailer. I was like, oh, sign me up, please. Yep, this is for me. And honestly, I having read the graphic novel, I really only have 2 criticisms, and I think they're fairly minor. But first of all is Percival, like the character in the book, like the character in the movie, bit of a different direction. Yeah.
Well, a little, but again, the way, I mean, obviously he looks very different. You know, James McAvoy is a very handsome young man. He is never going to look like an overweight, middle-aged, dinosaur of a spy.
And I'm okay with that. I am very okay with that.
Exactly. That was never going to happen. So physically, obviously, yes, he looks very different. But in terms of his character, he's not that different. Again, I was very happy with the way James played him. Yes, he's more of a sort of, punk rock, youthful kind of character. But the core of his character, that world weariness, the fact that he has gone native in Berlin, and the misogyny are all still there. So, at the core of it, he is still essentially the same character. So I was really happy with the way James played him.
Yeah, it's a different because he's immersed himself in the culture of that place and those times, and so it's a different take on the same concept, as you say. So I mean, for me, it's just because I can't handle differences. I'm that kind of pedantic nutcase. But the other criticism I have, which again, you could say is minor, but I view as slightly more egregious, is the ending where it turns out Lorraine is not just a double agent, she is a triple agent, and she was a good guy, as much as a spy can be a good guy, the whole time.
Well, sound the spoiler horn. Let's hope that people listening have already seen the movie, because but yes, you're right, that's a huge difference from the book. But you can see why they did it. There has always been the hope that this would be just the first movie of several. Yeah. And the ending of the book doesn't really leave a lot of room for that. So they had to change it. They had to adjust it so that if there were going to be more movies, that would make sense. And you can, the ending that we have very clearly sets up the idea that we may well see Lorraine again, only now working for somebody else. And whereas, as I say, the book does not do that at all. That's not the case. So, yes, it is a big difference, but I completely understand why they did it. And, everybody does want to make another movie as well. That's the thing. All the creative side, if you like, does want to make at least one more movie. Charlize wants to make it. Dave wants to direct it again. Kurt said he's up for writing it again. I'm sure we can get Elizabeth back for editing as well, and maybe even Jonathan Saylor to do cinematography again. Get the whole gang back together and just make a second movie. They all want to do it. It's just a case of getting the studio on board, getting the financing, getting somebody to pay for it.
Purse strings.
You're right, isn't it always the way? But as long as, once we can do that, like I say, creatively, everybody wants to make another one. And that was always the hope. So like I say, I can fully understand why we had that ending, even though it is, yes, quite different to the book and puts a completely different spin on everything you've just watched for the previous 2 hours.
Yeah, because I know I said I don't really like changes, but I can understand why a lot of them are made. It's when I can't understand why certain changes are made that I really go off my rocker. Because, this is the old adage in terms of adaptation. If you want to tell the author's story, tell the author's story. If you want to tell your own story, tell your own story. Don't use the author's story to tell your own story. And that's not the case here. They told your story, I think. So I'm happy with that, and I do want to see more.
Oh, yeah. No, it's very, in some ways, the movie is very faithful to the book. I mean, there's this strange dichotomy where, on the one hand, it's very different to the book in the feel, the mood. The book, as you know, is a very sort of sober, noirish, John le Carré style, Cold War thriller. And the film, obviously, is very bright, full of neon, loads of action, very sort of kinetic. But the actual story and the characters and even lines of dialogue are taken directly from the book. So it's this weird situation where it's, on the one hand, it's not like the book at all, but on the other hand, it's actually very faithful to the book. And I think that was a good way to go. I was, completely on board with that approach, because it is essentially the same story. And that, I think, has to be the core of the story, has to be the sort of most important thing. That surely is what attracts you to the property in the first place. And in the case of Charlize and her production company, I know that it was a combination of the story and Lorraine as a character that attracted them and attracted Charlize. She liked Lorraine as a character. So as long as you keep those, then making the movie more cinematic, making the story a more movie-like thing, I don't think is a bad approach at all, because if you'd actually just filmed the book, it'd be deathly dull. You know,
You'd
the
have
book
the killing joke. You'd have the killing joke.
It works as a book because it's a book. You expect different things from that kind of, you know, from when you're looking at something on paper. But a movie has to move. And if they just filmed the book, it would be 2 hours of, you know, people walking through parks and talking in offices, and it would be deathly dull.
My dad would love it. My dad would love it.
Well, and obviously I would watch it, but it does severely limit the audience when you have a film like that. So like I say, I completely understand why they went in the direction they did, and I was you know, approving of it. I'm a co-producer on the movie, so I read, you know, the draft of the screenplay, I saw a rough cut of the movie, all that sort of thing. So I, you know, saw how this thing was developing all the way through, and I was fully on board, because, yeah, I think it just would have been quite boring to be overly faithful to the book.
Oh yeah, that's the other extreme. It can be, well, as we mentioned, Killing Joke. That's probably the best example, because, I mean, as you say, graphic novels.
It's like, why bother?
Yeah, why bother? Because then we're just getting the same thing again. But at the same time, so much of the graphic novel does translate really well to the scene. The screen, the scene that I really took away from the graphic novel that I thought was great in the movie was that protest scene where Lorraine and a spyglass are moving through the protest trying to get away. And even though that scene does play very different in the movie, so much about what you see visually on the screen and on the page lines up so well.
It does, yeah. And I mean, that's a great case of how you can make a good adaptation, because that scene in the book is not all that long, you know. I mean, not even talking about just the stairwell fight. The stairwell fight's hilarious. The stairwell fight in the book is 4 pages, and yet it's, you know, a 12-minute centerpiece of the of the movie. But even if you take that whole scene from the moment that she meets with Spyglass to the moment that she escapes the assassin, in the book that's maybe 20-30 pages, but on screen that's 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes. It's a long chunk of the movie. So I think that's a really good example of how you can take something in the book, take its essence and its essential sort of story points, and then make something much more out of it, and much more cinematic, that has become, as I say, kind of the centerpiece of the movie.
Yeah, because the graphic novels are so, for want of a better phrase, pre-seed. They're so, the individual moments coupled together to create a flowing narrative. And if you do that on the screen, then you've just got like a storyboard. You can't do that.
And also in comics, we're completely restricted by the physical size. You know, the size of the page, the number of pages in a book. We constantly have that restriction. And so everything has to be, by necessity, compressed, and you use visual shorthand. And, you know, that's fine because that's what works in a comic. But again, you can't translate that directly to the screen. And so what they did was find those moments like the stairwell fight, or like the cinema fight in East Berlin at Alexanderplatz, which isn't even in the book visually. It's mentioned, but it's not, you know, when she arrives for her first contact with Merkel in the East, he says, "You're late." And she's like, "Oh yeah, I was followed, but I lost them at Alexanderplatz." And that's it. That's the only reference. But they saw that and went, aha.
We've got an opportunity here.
Right. Here's where we can really dive into this and expand this bit to get an exciting action scene out of it. And they did. And it's one of the best scenes in the movie, and one of the most memorable, because that's the scene where the KGB enforcer character gets the keys stuck in his face, which everybody remembers. Poor old Daniel, the stunt performer there. That's all anybody remembers. He's one of the main villains in the movie. He's the main guy that she fights in the stairwell scene. But all anybody remembers is he's the guy with the keys in his face.
Yeah. I winced at that scene in the theatre. God damn.
Everybody does. That's why everybody remembers it, because you're like, oh.
Ooh, dearie me. He won't forget where his keys are for a while. And so, talking about the visuals of the graphic novel, I want to talk about Sam Hart and his involvement. How did he come into the process?
Sam I've known Sam for many years. He's British, but he lives in Brazil. He moved there when he was, I think, about 9 years old with his mother. So and sort of goes back and forth between the two. But he mainly lives in Brazil, and he has a family there now and stuff. But he's the same age as me, so I knew that he had grown up at the same time as me, which is to say that, like me, he's old enough to remember the Cold War and to remember Europe during the Cold War and before the Berlin Wall fell. And that was really important for this first book, especially. That was really important to me, that we had an artist who could just remember what it was like in Europe at that time.
And share the same vision.
Yeah, and literally also just in terms of detail, wouldn't be drawing the wrong kind of cars or phone booths and things like that, would understand how Europe looked in the 1980s. And so, as I say, I'd known Sam for a while. We met at conventions and what have you. And I've always liked his work. And then when I was thinking, well, who can I get to draw this? I think I saw a mini comic that he'd been handing out at the Bristol Festival or something like that. I can't remember the details exactly. I just know that I looked at some of his latest, more recent work and thought, actually, that would be a really good fit. And he was the first person we asked. He was the first choice, and he said yes. And, the rest is history.
You got it right first time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Guys, I'm not into art, as regular listeners of this show will know, but I liked it here because it was so. It stood out for me because it was so so cold and so crisp, and the shadows made it look so stark, but that's because, in the most inviting way.
Well, that's because there are no shades of grey, literally no shades of grey, which obviously for a book that is all about shades of grey is quite ironic. And that was a request that I made. I asked Sam, would you be comfortable drawing this with no greys, just pure black and white? And, thankfully he said, yeah, that sounds like a very interesting way to approach it. Let's do it. And so, yes, you have this very, very stark black, white, no grey art style, very noirish, as I say, very stark and sort of spare, but that works for the story. It's exactly what the story called for.
Yeah, and it works so well, and the writing and the art just complements themselves so much, and it comes together, because sometimes you read graphic novels, the art is good, but the writing doesn't really fit necessarily, and vice versa. And here it is espionage in comic book form.
Yeah, like I say, Sam was my first choice, so yeah. We got lucky.
Absolutely, damn right you got lucky. It's brilliant. So, you've done so many things. There's lots of other things I want to talk about. First of all, you're no stranger to podcasts, are you?
I am not. No. I have. It's actually, unfortunately, on hiatus at the moment because of my workload. But up until recently, for the last 2.5 years, I had run a podcast called Unjustly Maligned on the Incomparable Network, which is a show, we call it the show for people who go against the grain. It's a show where I invite a guest on to talk about something they love that other people generally don't. So that could be, say, a movie or a TV show or even a video game or whatever that most people think is terrible, but that they think is great. So, for example, I had Liz Miles on talking about the Masters of the Universe movie, and one of the very first guests was Lee Alexander talking about the Twilight books, that sort of thing. Or it could be something that is maligned in the sense that more people should know about it. Not enough people even know it exists. So we've also covered, some more obscure things that the guests just wish more people were aware of. And it's a very, very... It's a fun show to do. As I say, unfortunately, because of my workload, I've had to put it on hiatus. But we got up to 87 episodes, regularly. At first it was once a week, then it was one every 2 weeks for the last year and a half. And it was a lot of fun to do. I had a great time doing it. But unfortunately, it's quite preparation intense, which is why, as I say, I've had to put it on hiatus. And I also do... One thing I do still do, because we only record about once every 4 or 5 weeks, is a heavy metal podcast called Thrash It Out, where my co-host Brian Latendry and I, each episode, I should say, we choose a heavy metal album and make the other person listen to it, and then we argue about it.
I love both of these ideas because first of all, I'm not very into metal. I'm not the kind of guy who's usually into metal. But I did have a phase because I play when I was a teenager. I played this video game, Brutal Legend. Have you played that?
Yeah. I know Brutal Legend. Yeah.
And I got so, because that game is so aesthetically rich. It is neck deep in heavy metal lore and iconography, and I just got so immersed in it. I thought, you know what, I really like this. Check this out. So I still got lots of songs that I just really liked. Got some Black Sabbath, got some Motorhead, and just
Excellent.
And I'm not really into right now. Do you know what I'm into? I'm into the Proclaimers. That's what I'm into.
Wow. Okay.
So quite different. Quite
did
different.
that happen after you moved to Scotland?
It did happen after I moved to Scotland. You know, they get you. They get you. They get you. They're immersed, especially in Edinburgh.
Press a CD on you at the border.
Yeah, they pretty much. Read this, read it. No, listen to this, and I like that as well because I have very eclectic taste, but I just really liked it just because it's so passionate and so ballad-like. A lot of the stuff.
Sure.
But I don't really know that much about it beyond that, though. That's the problem.
Well, but that's okay as long as you enjoy the music. But yeah, Brian and I are both lifelong metalheads, and he was actually, the show spun out of Unjustly Maligned because he was an early guest on Unjustly Maligned, and he did a Megadeth album, which most Megadeth fans don't like, but he thinks is great. And we had such a good time doing that and we'd been friends for many years before then anyway, that, I thought, I wonder if we could make a show out of just that style of, listening, because I'd never even heard that Megadeth album before. I'm not a Megadeth fan at all. So it was my first time listening to it, and we went through it track by track. And I just thought, there might be a whole show in here. And there is. And so for about the last 2 years now, Brian and I have done Thrash It Out. And we're up to, let me see, 12, 24. We're up to about 30 odd episodes now. I'm just about to record another one tomorrow, actually.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, wow. Because that's the great thing about podcasts and the internet in general. You can make a podcast about anything. And people
absolutely. Yeah. Thank goodness.
Yeah. Apparently someone will listen to anything, which is why we get people listening to us here on Podcapers. And the thing I like about Unjustly Maligned, though, is because it's sort of like the reverse of what I do, because I like to rag on things that people love and utterly destroy them. If you listen to any of my episodes about Disney or DC, you'll know that I have a special spot in my cold black obsidian heart devoted entirely to them and destroying them from people's public consciousness. But you've done a much more nicer, but you're Paragon, I'm Renegade, basically. You've gone a much nicer way about it and talking about extolling the virtues of these things. I've listened to one of them, the Star Wars Episode 1.
Oh, God, yeah. We did all of the prequels, yes.
Yeah. Because I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan, but more.
No, neither am I. But but some people are.
And I think, more and more, I'm learning that there are, actually thinking about it, there are some good things about these films. They're not good films, but there are some good things about them. You can clearly see that some effort was put in. There are lots of things actually to enjoy that you could just hold on to for dear life, because otherwise it's just nightmare and darkness.
But part of the reason that I came up with the idea for UMP, which is what we call Unjust Maligned, was because, we all enjoy a good ragging, a good dragging, and as you say, a good destruction now and again. I mean, there's a reason that Room 101 has been running for 20 years or something on the telly now. We all enjoy that from time to time, but frankly, there's a lot of that around, especially these days on the internet, and so I thought it would be nice for once to have a show that, is focused on the opposite. Because I get people all the time, have people saying to me, oh, you know what, you should do an episode where instead of the usual format, you have somebody argue against something that everybody else likes. And I'm like, that's the rest of the internet. Yeah. You can get that anywhere.
Yeah, come to our show. We do that all the time.
Right.
You're different. That's the point.
Exactly, yes.
And I do, as much as I don't like defending certain things, I think it's important that there are people out there that do defend them. Because I think with pop culture, and whether you like or dislike it, it needs to be balanced and scaled to a certain extent. I mean, that's... for those of you who are wondering what the backstory behind these red and blue glasses that I wear all the time are, I view them as symbolic. Like, the blue is positivity, it's hopefulness, is optimism. The red is negativity, it's pessimism, it's not liking stuff. And I think it's important to have both of them, both red and blue glasses on at the same time, just so that you can get a sense of balance. You can look at both the bad and the good. Because if you just look at the good, or just look at the bad, then you're not seeing the full picture. And it's important to listen to other people's point of view, because then, worst case scenario, you won't be convinced, in which case nothing will have changed. Best case scenario, you might think, oh, actually, they've got a point. And
right, you might be convinced and change your mind. And the thing is, it's not just about, opinions on pop culture and stuff. For me, anyway, a lot of the show, the enjoyment of it for me comes from talking to people about something that they really love. That's the key thing, is because I've occasionally invited guests on and they've been sort of, well, I could talk about this. I could probably defend this from an intellectual point of view if need be. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm after. I'm after something that you absolutely love. I love talking to people who have a real passion for something and finding out why they have that passion, really digging into what it is about it that attracts them and draws them towards it. That to me is much more interesting than sort of asking somebody to unleash fury on, something they dislike for 5 or 10 minutes, which, like I say, it has its place, but it's not the show I wanted to make.
Yeah, because often when you have an emotional quotient to it, an emotional quality, there's usually a good reason for that. And it's the reason why we like so many things or dislike so many things. And once you get to the root of that, you kind of get swept up in other people's passion. And then it goes beyond whether you agree or disagree. It's just like you have a good time, which is what we're all here to do, really.
Exactly. Just have a good conversation, have a fun time talking about something that this person loves and find out why. Yeah, because that to me is very entertaining.
So you talked about the Star Wars prequels, and I just want to get your view on the latest Star Wars film.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm a big fan of the new Star Wars stuff. In fact, I've actually talked about these on the Incomparable Network on their main show. I've actually guest hosted several shows about the new Star Wars movies. I love them. I think, and I wouldn't claim any of them were perfect, but then so few movies are. But I think
no movies are. I don't think any movie is perfect.
Well, there's one or two that you could maybe argue, but yeah, generally I'm willing to overlook a few flaws in any movie. And I think The Force Awakens has one or two flaws, but overall it is a great movie, and it felt like a Star Wars movie. It feels like a real Star Wars movie in a way that the prequels just didn't to me. And I really enjoyed Rogue One as well. It wasn't quite as good as I was hoping it would be, but I think some of that was my own fault for projecting too much
hype is the destroyer of good movies.
Well, not just that, but also lying in your trailers, which is actually why I am now completely going in blind to all future Star Wars movies, because that really sort of dipped my appreciation of Rogue One the first time I watched it, because I was constantly waiting for some of the coolest bits we'd seen in the trailers, which then were nowhere to be seen on screen. Having watched it again a couple of times more, I got past that and can appreciate it for what it is, and do think it's a really good movie. And actually slightly maligned by, unjustly maligned by people. But yeah, I'm a big fan of them, and I'm really looking forward to Last Jedi now.
I am hopefully optimistic. I have my issues with Episode 7. I did really like Rogue One. The biggest issue for me with Rogue One was getting over the fact that there wasn't a crawl. When it opened and there was no crawl, I was like, what's going on here? I don't understand. I'm lost and confused. I need a bit of floating text in space to explain to me what this movie's about.
I actually thought that was a really good decision. I thought that the idea of, no, the crawl is only for, sort of proper Star Wars saga movies, right? Not for the spin-off movies. I actually thought was a really clever way of differentiating them and making it feel different. And not just that, also having things like captions on the screen to tell you what planet you're on, which again, you don't see in the saga movies. I thought little touches like that, so that they do feel, without explicitly saying it, they just, have little things that make them feel like, oh, this is, something a bit different,
but it's still
in subtle ways. But it absolutely still felt like Star Wars, yeah, which is why I enjoyed it. But yeah, I thought they handled that split between the saga movies and the spin-off movies in a really clever way.
Absolutely. But I'm like you. I'm foregoing trailers for anything that I know that I'm going to see. I never watch any Marvel trailers. I have seen the latest trailer for The Last Jedi, but only because I was in the cinema and I couldn't help but see
Right,
it.
and you can't avoid it. Yeah, I think I've seen like the 10-second teaser, and luckily that's all I've been exposed to. So, and that tells you nothing basically. So
There are
that's
so
fine.
many trailers nowadays. I mean, I'm not that old, I don't think, but I remember a time when you get at most 2 trailers. At most, you get the teaser, you get the trailer, and that's it. Maybe a couple of TV spots. Now it's like the teaser trailer, the international teaser, the main trailer, the second trailer, the third trailer, and at this point you could basically cobble together and make at least 2/3 of the movie.
Dude, you were a teenager when Brutal Legend came out. Trust me, you're not old. I remember not only a time when there was only one trailer, I remember a time when there were intermissions in movies. So, put that in your pipe and smoke it. The modern flavor for, 10 trailers that almost tell you the entire story of the movie before you've even seen it does not sit well with me at all. It never has. And I know there have been studies about this sort of thing saying that, people who already know the story of a movie or a book actually enjoy it more when they read or watch it for the first. And I'm like, I don't care. Maybe that's true, but I get distracted. If I know what's coming in a movie the first time I watch it, the whole time I'm waiting for the things that I know are coming. And
Even
so
if
I'm
you're not consciously waiting, you are subconsciously waiting.
Yeah, and so it's distracting me from actually concentrating on what's on the screen. So yeah, as the years have gone on, and that style of trailer has become more and more prevalent, I avoid them more and more. And pretty much the only time I watch trailers now is if I'm in the cinema, and so obviously there are trailers running before a movie that I'm watching. But I almost never watch them out of choice now.
Yeah, whenever the trailer comes on, usually, unless there's slightly too many people, I just put my fingers in my ears and I hum. I just close my eyes, I'm not listening, and then I get a lot of really weird looks.
Oh yeah, I bet you're really popular in your local theatre.
Oh god, it's that guy again. Oh god. He watch most of the trailers, but then a big one comes on and he just sticks his fingers in his ears. Why does he do that? But I've got a loyalty card, so they won't bar me from entry. Ha 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 ha. Now, another thing I want to talk about is that you've written a couple of prose novels. You got another one coming up that is also in the spy fiction genre.
That's correct. Yeah, it's officially my sort of debut mainstream novel, because my first book was an illustrated novella, and then my second book was a full-size novel, but it was a work for hire shared universe thing that I did for Abaddon Books, which is the imprint of Rebellion, the 2000 AD publishers, about 12 years ago now. And I was very proud of that book, but it wasn't, again, it was a world that I hadn't created, and it was just done on a sort of a different contractual basis and what have you. So officially, this is my mainstream fiction debut, as they say. And yes, it is another spy novel, although this is a modern contemporary spy novel, and is actually kind of high tech, as opposed to the Cold War stuff of Coldest City and Atomic Blonde. It's called the Exphoria Code,
which is an excellent name. I love that word, Exphoria.
Thank you. The word came to me separately ages ago, and I just sort of kept it in my notes going, that's a title for something, but I don't know what. And then when I was planning this book, I thought, aha, that's what this is. Put the two together. So yeah, this is a contemporary spy thriller about introducing a main character called Bridget Sharp, who is a cyber analyst and hacker working for a specialist department within MI6. And she's actually in therapy. She's recovering from her very first field mission, went terribly wrong 3 years ago, resulted in the death of a fellow officer. And so she's been desk bound and in therapy for 3 years ever since. But she is forced back into the field when her best friend is murdered, seemingly in connection with a series of strange internet posts that they were investigating. And so
trolls, damn it.
Oh, worse than trolls. So Bridge is forced to go back into the field and to go undercover in an top secret Anglo-French military project to root out a mole. And the mole could be the killer of her best friend. But what actually happens is the truth is far worse than anybody could have imagined. And soon enough, she is alone, on the run, desperate, and a nuclear terrorist plot is unfolding around her. And yeah, there's military drones and theft of software code. So there's lots of high tech stuff in there, but there is also plenty of old fashioned spycraft as well. Lots of just breaking and entering and stolen secrets and quite a bit of action as well.
I love your description of that because I love the idea of both old style espionage and new style espionage fusing together, because often you find that it's one or the other. You get
One or the other, yeah. No, this book is entirely the whole, the very premise of the book is about those two sides of espionage clashing and the dichotomy between the two of them.
Yeah, because I mean, when it comes to the really high tech stuff, often I get kind of distracted by that. When it's done in a contemporary way, like with hackers or something, that's kind of interesting. But more often than not, it's taken in a really weird way. Like, have you ever seen Spy Kids?
I've never actually seen it. That's the Robert Rodriguez movie, isn't it? No, yeah. I've never seen it.
Very interesting movie. Like Robert Rodriguez as a filmmaker. There's lots of high tech stuff with like jetpacks and laser beams and morphing people's heads into cartoon characters. It's a weird series of films, and I always wondered, like, why is this called Spy Kids? This is high-tech, weird, goofy, action, fun kids, not really Spy Kids. But then you got things like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which I really do like, but it's
completely in the opposite direction.
It's completely the opposite direction. Also, it feels not out of touch necessarily, but distant from today's sort of world, although, as you say, we are looping back a bit. So we
do appear to be going in circles, yeah. But no, I understand completely what you mean, and that's partly why the Exphoria Code has that focus on both sides, because I wanted to, like I said, because I do love, as I said before, I love that old Cold War, John le Carré style spy fiction, but I also read lots of science fiction, but I also love, sort of modern technology stuff as well. I like a good Tom Clancy from time to time, and I have spent my entire career on the internet. I wouldn't have a career if not for the internet. So to me, and especially with the way that developments in the real world are going these days, it seems inconceivable to write a modern spy novel that doesn't feature modern technology, and at the very least things like the internet and iPhones and what have you in some fashion. And so that's why this is, again, it was a passion project. I didn't have a contract for it when I started writing, but when the movie of Atomic Blonde got rolling, I thought, okay, well, surely now I can afford to take a few months off and write that novel I've been promising my literary agent for about the last 5 years and never got round to. Surely now I can take some time off from the grind. And so that's exactly what I did, and got the whole thing done, finished, polished before we even sent it out to publishers for submission, because I wanted to, again, write something for me, write a book that I would want to read and that made sense to me, rather than something that a publisher might think was viable for the market and all that sort of stuff. I'm not interested in following those kind of in going down that path, because I think if you try to chase the market, you will inevitably fall behind. It's by the time you get there, the market's moved on to something else. And so I think, especially with novels, it's much more important to simply write the story that you are passionate about and that you believe in, and then trust that, as you said before, that passion will come across to the reader. And luckily, that seems to have happened with Exphoria Code. We've had a few advanced reviews so far, and they've been stellar. The book comes out on December 14th in the UK and Commonwealth. The ebook is available now, actually, but that's the print book is December 14th. And yeah, so far reception to it has been really good. So I just, I hope that more people can read it and enjoy it.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a bit behind in terms of my my reading books. The last book I read was actually Jumper by Stephen Gore, because I saw the movie ages ago and I thought, well, this isn't that great, and then I read the book and like, oh, good. So if I ever get a chance to read it, I definitely will, because it's one of those things that, as you say, we're chasing the market and stuff like that. I mean, the way I look at it is, you never know what other people really want, but you always know what you want. People really do deep down know what they want. As I say, it's just when you write something for you, if you love it, assuming it's written in a good way, which I think we can both agree, you're good at that. You can write well. So
I'm not bad.
You're no E.L. James, let me put it that way. So, no, we won't go into that deep, dark hole of awful. And so it's the sort of thing that, I mean, I'm just looking at the cover art. It looks like a proper book, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, it's no, I love the cover art. We got there really quickly as well. That's I have a lot of friends who are novelists, and I've heard some real horror stories from them of, getting cover designs back from a publisher and just looking at them and going, none of these have anything to do with the book. But the cover that we have for the Exphoria Code, by contrast, was one of maybe like 3 or 4 designs that the publisher, had the designer mock up. And it, the initial mock up that we saw was pretty close to what you see on the book. It was surprisingly, the minute I saw it, I was like, yeah, that's the one. Let's tweak a few things here and there. But that basic design was there right from the start. And I think it does a really good job of getting across what's in the book, the style of the book, and as you say, also just looking like it belongs on the shelves at W.H. Smith's, which is always nice.
Yeah, I mean, you could take away, you could erase all knowledge that I have about this book and what it's about, your name, the title, the fact that it's a Bridget Sharp thriller, and I could just look at it. And, I think this is probably about spies or espionage or something. Some sort of intrigue is going on here. So it's evocative. And talking about the title, I mean, Exphoria, I think that's evocative. It sounds like evocative. Again, like with the Coldest City, it comes together. And I really do like it when this sort of thing happens. Because so often I read things or watch things and I like, this is good. There's something feels wrong. There's a cog in the machine that is ticking over and not quite right. This is just blending together. Frankly.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy with everything, the way everything's turned out. The cover, the sort of the marketing approach that we've taken, and like I say, people's reception to it as well. It seems to be, we seem to have synced everything together so it feels like a complete package. So as I say, now it's just down to whether or not people actually enjoy the story and enjoy my writing. So, fingers crossed.
Absolutely. Well, if they do get positive reception, do you think you'll write more of these? Would there be more?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Yeah, no, that's why it's subtitled a Bridget Sharp thriller across the bottom, because, yes, I intend to write at least 2 more of these. I'm actually working on the second book at the moment. Nothing to, sort of talk about or announce, but I am working on it, on, making notes and outlining and what have you at the moment. And I've already made some rough notes for a third book as well. So I think I want to do 3 at least. If they are, successful and there's demand for it, then I could potentially carry on and, do a whole series. But I think at least a trilogy is
3's a good number.
I would very much like to do that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, everybody's used to trilogies. Everybody understands them. So that's the minimum that I would like to do with this character.
Yeah, well, I look forward to seeing where this goes, as I do with Coldest City and Atomic Blonde. Is there so much stuff that you're writing that has not just people want to do it, but also the potential for it to go forward, and I like that.
Yeah, well, and that's, which is great, but that's the result of almost 20 years of slaving away in the salt mines, as it were.
You put in your dues. You put in your dues.
Right. I'm in the position where Atomic Blonde allows me to roll out that old line about being an overnight success after 17 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I that's another thing I do hate about this industry, is that so many people with so many good ideas have to do other people's ideas first, and I suppose that makes sense because you've got to prove yourself. But then again, it's like, it's 17 years.
Well, and, I'm very lucky, really, in that most of my work, even for those 17 years, has been my own. Most of the things I have done have been my own stories, my original creations. Yes, I've done work for hire. Yes, I've done adaptations. Yes,
You've done video games, man. Come on.
Well, I've written video games and I wrote, some superheroes for Marvel. But if you look at, the sort of sum total of my output, the majority of it is my own stuff. And that's, as you say, that's not that common. That's quite uncommon for a lot of people who've been around in the business as long as I have. So I regard myself as very fortunate that I've managed to make a fairly good living, mostly writing whatever the hell I wanted to. when I wanted to.
That's the dream.
Exactly, yeah. Not having restrictions placed upon me in that sense. So, like I say, I regard myself as very fortunate. Don't think otherwise.
No, don't worry. So, no, I was talking about your dreams, like beyond the Exphoria Code and Coldest City and Atomic Blonde. What other things would you like to do in the future?
Well, Justin Greenwood and I are hoping to return. Well, I shouldn't say hoping. We are planning to return to The Fuse, which is our sci-fi cops series, Image Comics. We've done 4 volumes of that, and then we took a break so that Justin could do a Hamilton graphic novel, and I actually wrote the Exphoria Code during that break as well. But we do want to return to that world, and we're still talking about how we might do it exactly, and I don't want to sort of get into details, but we do plan to return to that world and to those characters in some fashion. So there's that. Obviously, as I said, I'm writing a sequel, or planning a sequel at any rate at the moment, to the Exphoria Code. I am in talks with some people to do some work for the screen, and that's really all I can say about that.
I won't press you for details. You'll tell me after the show, right?
Of course.
I'm joking.
But yes, and that's something obviously that I would very much like to do. I am also consulting on a couple of video games at the moment. What else? I'm just looking at my list of things to do.
The fact that you have a list of things, that's big project at end. That bodes very well for you, I think.
Oh yeah, I always have a big list of. I mean, and the thing is, I think this is the case for any writer. We all have an enormous amount of things that we want to do that we know in our hearts that we'll never get round to. We won't have time to do. But it's a case of picking and choosing which one we want to focus on at any given moment. So yeah, here we are. I'm just looking at my list now. So as I say, there's some screen work. There's the third Coldest book. There's the sequel to the Exphoria Code. And a short story. I wrote a science fiction short story that I'm currently shopping around magazines at the moment. And I'm hoping to write a second story based in the same universe as that one. Next year, there's another video game in the offing. Oh, and the third Codename Babushka story arc as well. So that'll be sometime either next year or the year after. So yeah, I mean, I like to keep busy.
It sounds like it. Yeah, I just hope you find time to do more Unjustly Maligned, because I really like that stuff.
Well, that's the problem. That's why I've had to put that aside, because there is all this other stuff, like things like movie stuff and what have you, and this novel all kind of swirling around at the moment. And
I don't want you to burn out. I don't want you to burn out.
Oh no, don't worry. Like I say, I've been doing this long enough that I know my pace. There's no risk of that. But it does mean exactly, if I was trying to do Unjustly Maligned as well, I would risk burnout, and that's why I've had to put it on hiatus. But if I can return to it, I will, because I have a lot of fun doing it. It's just that it's a lot of work, a lot of preparatory work besides the actual recording of each episode in order to make it. So I do hope that I can return to it at some point in the near future, because like I say, I still love making the show. I just don't have the time anymore.
Yeah, well, it's better to be busy doing lots of stuff you love.
I mean, good problems to have. Yeah, first world problems.
Yeah, come on. Whatever works or whatever doesn't work, it's absolutely fine. But you know what? I'm looking forward to whatever you've got planned, because you've done a lot of good stuff in the past, a lot of good stuff right now. So I think it's a bright future for us all.
Oh, well, I certainly hope so, yes.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us today.
You're very welcome. This has been fun.
I'm so glad you had fun. Now, if you enjoyed the show, Capers, please tell your friends, shout it from the rooftops, and if you haven't already, go back and listen to some of our other brilliant episodes, like our episode with Dave Gibbons and Tim Pilcher talking about their stuff. You can listen to the show on iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, or at podcapers.com. We're on Pod. We've got our own thing now. We also have a Patreon. Check out the rewards. Patreon.com/AP2HYC. If you want to get in touch with us, suggest show topics, or maybe you want to come on the show yourself, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AP2HYC. Thank you very much to Dan Harris for our lovely logo, the microphone, the red and blue 3D glasses. Those are mine. And thank you very much for listening. This has been Podcapers, the official podcast of A Place to Hang Your Cape. Cue the music!